We'll give it just a minute, but we're live on YouTube, so we'll get started with the Lafayette and Louisville and Colorado ballot issue presentation in just 1 minute. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the City of Lafayette and Louisville and Colorado ballot issue presentation. Before we begin today, I want to invite our Spanish speaking community members to click the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and choose the Spanish option to hear the form in that language. We'll pause for a minute while we give while our interpreter gives that announcement in Spanish.
Y ahorita vamos a repasar las iniciativas, los asuntos relacionados con Lafayette, Louisville y Colorado, pero ahora sí, para saber cómo acceder a la interpretación. Lo que van a hacer, en un momento van a ver un globo. Por favor, seleccione el globo, luego seleccione español y estarán ustedes enchufados. Si están en un teléfono, vayan a los 3 puntos, bajan a interpretación, luego lo mismo. Si pueden ustedes escoger español, van a escucharnos a perfección. Muchas gracias.
We'll give them just a minute to move over to that channel.
You see there's a question already?
That was a question from the interpreter, so I believe we are good. Okay, welcome again, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the City of Lafayette and Louisville and Colorado ballot issue presentation. My name is Mandy Nuku, and I am the Operations Director for the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. For 100 years, we have encouraged informed and active participation in government and influenced public policy through education and advocacy. We are pleased to have our Spanish language interpreters, Rosabelle Rice and Kelly Music. Our presenters today are Charles Duche, Deborah Hayes, Peggy Leach, and Barbara Merrill. I would like to express my thanks to the ballot issue team for their hard work and commitment to our mission. The complete ballot issue pamphlets are available on our website at www.lwvbc.org under the 2021 election tab, along with all the links to the candidate forums we are hosting. The League of Women Voters of Boulder County works throughout the year to help empower voters and defend democracy. We rely on the generous donations of our members and community to achieve our mission. Please consider donating today at lwvbc.org. If you want to lend your time and skills to encourage civic engagement for all people in a nonpartisan manner, please join us. All the information you need is on our website. And now we'll begin today's presentation with the State of Colorado issues with Charles Duche. And just give me 1 moment and I will share our presentation. Okay, Charles, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mandy, and good afternoon. The Colorado ballot issues are 3 in number, 1 amendment and 2 propositions. The first ballot issue is Amendment 78, which is titled Legislative Authority for Spending State Money. Also requirements for spending custodial money. This is an initiated amendment to the Colorado Constitution. Therefore, it requires a 55% approval of the vote to actually pass. This measure would require custodial money, mainly federal funds, given to the state from outside the Colorado to be spent by the state legislature through the appropriation process instead of the executive branch. It is important to learn what custodial money actually is. Custodial money examples are federal funds, which would be, for example, emergency relief funds, regular funding that the federal government provides funds to help with state programs like health and human services, or grants for specific purposes. Again, this custodial money is for a specific purpose. Also, legal settlement funds, example, tobacco funds for anti-smoking, Volkswagen settlement for clean air programs. All of these would be considered custodial money and would be kept in a separate fund. Next slide, please. Major provisions of Amendment 78 are that it would create a new custodial funds transparency fund. This would be a separate fund, and it would cause disbursement of those funds to be only by the state legislature through the appropriations and hearings process. The financial impact of this amendment, if passed, is projected to increase spending by the state by at least $1 million annually due to the need for additional staff in budget offices and legislative committees to administer the fund. Next slide. Those in favor say that this would ensure that all state money is allocated by the legislature and provide oversight for how money is spent and require public hearings to get feedback and promote transparent spending of state funds. Next slide. Those opposed say, well, gee, this duplicates an administrative process that's already in place for spending these designated specific purpose funds, as the state legislature is currently under the process by which it is done, currently is informed of how and when funds are spent. It would slow the process of funds disbursement and create needless additional administrative expense when the outcome would essentially be the same, and could significantly delay funds expenditure. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions yet. I just want to remind everyone that you can either put a question in the chat or in the Q&A, or if you're watching on YouTube, you're welcome to comment on there and we'll get your questions. But I don't see any at this time, so I think you can go ahead and move on to the next one.
Next slide, please. The next ballot issue is Proposition 119. It is titled Learning Enrichment and Academic Progress Program. In summary, this is an initiated amendment to Colorado statutes, which would raise the tax rate on marijuana sales gradually by 5% and divert school trust lands revenue to raise an estimated $137,600,000 in funds, which would be needed to be applied to the programs it proposes outside of public schools for after-school enrichment and support. Major provisions are that it creates a program for out-of-school learning opportunities for ages 5 through 17. How also it creates an independent agency to administer the program. This agency would be truly independent, as the Colorado Learning Authority that would be created under this proposition would be independent from oversight by the State Board of Education and the Colorado Department of Education. Next slide, please. Major provisions include an initial 9-member board of directors, which would be appointed by the governor. After that, board members would appoint or provide for their replacements after those initial appointments. Learning opportunities would include tutoring, extra instruction in subjects such as reading, math, science, writing, music, and art. Parents would choose which program their children would attend, and payments would go directly to the providers of those programs. Providers chosen by the parents would be paid $1,500 per student per year. Next slide, please. Financial impact. The proposition would increase marijuana sales tax gradually from 15%, which it is currently now, to 20% by 2024. Expenditures to administer the fund and make the payments that are provided for in the proposition are estimated to be 55.8 million in the first half year after if the proposition is approved, and $109.1 million in the next full year and future years. Revenue for the fund would come from two sources. One is the sales tax increase, and the other source would be diverted funds from the lands trust. It is estimated that the schools would lose an estimated $30.7 million through lost investment earnings that would otherwise be used for K-12 funding. Those in favor say COVID disruptions mean Colorado children are behind in learning goals. Low-income families fall behind due to disparity in enrichment activities. School districts are funded locally, and this initiative would create a statewide program to provide for equity. Also, they state that increasing school funding will not address inequities. Next slide, please. Those opposed say that this could be considered another type of voucher program, diverting tax funds from public education to private organizations. They also state that it would allow public money to be directed to private programs. There is no requirement within the proposition that parents choose academic subject tutoring. Private entities would directly receive funds raised by the new tax. Raising the tax on legal marijuana might increase unregulated marijuana because it would cost less and make it more appealing. It does not address the lack of providers in rural communities and establishes programs that directly compete with public schools. Are there any questions?
We'll give it just a couple more seconds before moving on. Does anybody have questions on 119? You can either raise your hand or you're welcome to just type it in the chat or Q&A. If something comes up as we move along, feel free to ask it and we can touch on it before we move to the city of issues. But I think for now, Charles, let's go ahead and go on to 120.
Okay, next slide, please. Proposition 120. I believe we have a sequencing problem for 120. Okay, thank you. This is titled Property Tax Assessment Rate Reduction and Voter Approved Revenue Change. In summary, this proposes amending Colorado statutes to lower property tax assessment rates for non-residential property from the current 29% to 26.4%, and for residential property from 7.1 to 6.5. Major provisions lowers property tax rates, but it does not affect mill levies because mill levies are set by separate jurisdictions such as cities, counties, and special tax districts. Next slide, please.
Oops.
The financial impact of this proposition, should it be passed, would decrease local government property tax revenue by $45.9 million in 2022 and a projected $50.3 million in 2023 and estimated to be larger in ensuing years. It also would increase state spending requirements in the amount of $12.3 million for 2022, $14.1 million in 2023 to make up for the lost revenue that would not be coming to school districts because of the rate reductions. Decreased funds also would decrease for the senior and disabled veteran homestead exemption. As an example, if this were to pass, it would lower property tax on multifamily property. Now, multifamily property is like an apartment building, for example, and it would lower it, for example, by an estimated $251 for a property that's valued at approximately $1 million. It is important to note, with the passage of Senate Bill 21-293, this rate reduction in the proposition would only apply to multifamily, like I said, apartment buildings, and to lodging properties like hotels and motels. Single-family home property taxes will not change due to the passage of this Senate bill. Next slide, please. Those in favor say this initiative reduces property tax assessment rates at a time when home prices are increasing. State and local governments received $12 billion in federal stimulus money, so a tax break is ideal for families and businesses. Since the government has more money for next year, and it would be more money for just next year, it appears, this initiative only slows the increase. And the initiative gives $25 million for the homestead exemption. Next slide, please. Those opposed say that this would reduce revenues for cities, counties, fires, police, schools that rely heavily on property taxes for their funding. Some local entities, for example, rural entities, had little or no increase in property values. Declining assessment rates means that they would have to try to make up that revenue that was lost by the decreased tax rate by increasing their mill levy, which is their only other source of revenue, which can't be raised without additional voter approval. Once rates are lowered, it is a very complex and difficult process to change them due to Tabor. And the $25 million for homestead exemption is not guaranteed within the proposition and may not occur. Are there any questions, ma'am?
I don't see any questions, but we'll just give it a couple seconds before we move on to the Louisville issue.
None?
Nope, I don't see any.
With that, I will turn it over to Peggy, who will talk about the city of Louisville. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. I'll be talking about the city of Louisville's issue 2A. There's only one issue in Louisville this year. The title of this one is Debt and Tax Increase for Transportation Improvements. It was referred to the voters by City Council, and this is basically a bond issue. It allows bonds to be issued for up to $51,420,000 with a repayment cost of up to $90,240,000. The purpose is to fund major transportation investments, including construction of 6 underpasses and related improvements. The bonds are to be repaid with property taxes, starting with tax collection year 2022. Maximum bond payments of no more than $3,786,000 would be made annually, with a maximum authorized mill levy increase of 5.450 mills. City Council also passed a resolution stating their intent that significant portions of the bond payments will be covered by sources other than an increased mill levy each year. So some more background on this. The city had a 1.5-year planning process for their transportation master plan, and council received significant public input during that process. Based on that input, council identified and prioritized 6 large projects to pursue. It includes underpasses at 6 locations. South Boulder Road at Main Street, Highway 42 at Short, South, or Caledonia, basically in the Delo area, Powerline Trail at Dillon Road, South Boulder Road at Via Appia, Burlington Northern Railroad in the proximity of the High Line Lateral Trail, and South Boulder Road at Highway 42. A lot of this was because so much of Louisville's growth has been north of South Boulder Road. And so there's a lot of pedestrian and bicycle traffic trying to get across South Boulder Road to the Main Street area. Underpasses typically cost about $8 million each, and Louisville has already built several. In the event that the full amount of the mill levy needs to be assessed, the estimated annual impact on a single-family residence is estimated to be $390 if the market value of the house is $1 million. However, per the council's statement of intent, they hope to direct at least $1.5 million per year to the bond repayment. Remember, the bond repayment is about $3.8 million. So 1.5 would come from their capital projects fund. And they also expect a contribution from the Louisville Revitalization Commission of between 1.25 million and 3 million annually. So this means that the mill levy would need to be raised to cover less than 1 million of the $3.8 million payments each year. Those in favor say improvements are needed for Louisville's transportation system. They will create new options and connect neighborhoods with bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Traffic flow and street capacity will be improved, and public safety will be improved by removing cyclists and pedestrians from busy roadways. And the city's current capital improvement fund cannot sustain the total cost of the improvements, requiring other sources of revenue like a property tax. Those opposed say the bond package is too large and maxes out Louisville's bonding capacity for many years to come, limiting options if emergencies should arise. The amount of bonding capacity is calculated based on current property values, which are high. If the economy declines, property tax rates will need to be raised or city services cut to make bond payments. And property taxes have a disproportionate impact on citizens with fixed incomes, particularly senior citizens and those who live in affordable housing. So are there any questions on this Louisville issue?
No questions just yet, but let's give it a few seconds before we move on to the Lafayette issues. If anybody has a question for the Louisville one, you can drop it in the chat at any time if something comes up.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to Deborah, who will start with the Lafayette issue 2A. 2B.
2B. Yeah. Thank you, Peggy. Lafayette has 5 proposals on the ballot. Lafayette 2B, funding public safety services. That proposal comes from City Council, which seeks voter approval for a new sales and use tax of 0.27%, 27/100%. That is 2.7 cents on a $10 purchase, or more realistically, I guess, 27 cents on a $100 purchase. The tax would begin in 2022 and it would continue without an end date. Why is Lafayette City Council proposing this sales tax? First, mental health is a growing concern. It's cost effective to partner mental health professionals with the police if the 911 call involves behavioral health issues. This approach is likely to reduce harm and decrease the number of arrests and thus decrease the jail population. All good things. Secondly, the city has experienced considerable population growth without enough increase in public safety coverage. In 2019, a survey of 21 cities along the Denver-Boulder corridor found that Lafayette had the lowest police to population ratio. Thirdly, the fire department's equipment is aging. Fire engines, ambulances, and other equipment needs to be replaced. And finally, state requirements have increased. Last year, the Colorado legislature passed a law that requires all law enforcement agencies, local and state, to issue body-worn cameras by July of 2023. Without this new revenue, Lafayette does not have the funds to maintain, store, and share the large amount of video data collected from body cameras. When you have your ballot, you'll see that the ballot language for 2B describes 4 categories of improved safety services that the new sales tax would fund. First, the sales tax revenue would enable the city to provide mental health co-responders on 911 calls when needed. Secondly, it would provide additional firefighters and police officers to shorten the 911 response times and capabilities. Third, it would provide resources for emergency management and for planning on how to maintain community resilience in the face of disasters, whether environmental or natural disasters or human-caused disasters. And fourth, the revenue would go toward maintaining, replacing, and enhancing fire and police equipment and operating expenses. Those in favor of 2B say the response time to 911 calls would be improved with expanded staffing and upgraded police and fire equipment. Supporters say residents deserve a higher level of public safety services, and they say this is not a property tax, it is paid by everyone, and the expanded public safety services will benefit the entire community. Those opposed to 2B say there is no sunset provision, no expiration date. Opponents also say that Lafayette should be more responsible with taxes collected to prevent additional taxes. And they say sales tax is a greater burden for lower income people. So I will pause for questions. I don't think I see any.
No, I don't see any questions.
So now Peggy will talk about Lafayette 2C.
Thank you, Deborah. 2C is titled Funding Mental Health and Human Services. It is referred to the voters by City Council, and it's another sales and use tax increase. This one would authorize a sales and use tax of 0.1% or 1 cent on a $10 purchase. It's expected to raise about $750,000 in the first year. It would start in 2022, and there is no expiration date. Lafayette's current sales and use tax rate is 3.5%. Revenues from the tax would fund mental health services and human services. Types of services funded would be food, rent, utilities, childcare, medical care, mental health care and resources, and support for victims of domestic violence. These services would be provided through contractual partnerships with nonprofit agencies that provide these safety net services and programs for Lafayette residents. So the city of Lafayette doesn't staff human service and that type of thing. They will do everything through the nonprofits. A little more detail on this, the background. The number of Lafayette residents requiring assistance is growing, and particularly as a result of the pandemic. Caseloads are increasing while financial support from county, state, and federal governments is decreasing. And the term mental health services includes, but is not limited to, individual, group, or family therapy, addiction recovery services, older adult specialty care, psychiatric services, case management, and health and wellness coaching. Those in favor say Lafayette's sales tax rate is the fourth lowest of 11 nearby communities. A stronger safety net will improve the lives of our most valuable residents. And improving mental health services can reduce incidents of violence, hospitalization, incarceration, and homelessness, saving money and strengthening family stability. Those opposed say the tax has no expiration date. Instead of increasing our taxes, the city should sell off public land, and additional revenue should come from property tax, not from taxing all residents. So are there any questions on 2C?
Yes, one question was, are these agencies such as Sister Carmen and MHP, which I assume they mean mental health partners?
Yes, it would be those types of agencies.
And then a follow-up question to that from online is, are the nonprofit assistance organizations in support of this measure?
I'm not sure of that.
Okay. We'll find out and
All right,
post a
yes.
comment. Any other questions? Okay, I think we can move on to 2D.
So that will be Barbara, and we'll hear from Barbara now.
2D is proposed by the city council. It is to clean up language in the home rule charter to make it gender neutral, get rid of phrases like he, she, his, her, him, etc., and make it more specific and gender neutral, and including using such terms as the member, the candidate, such person, the mayor, as appropriate. The charter, which establishes the vision of the city, has historically used masculine and feminine pronouns, and this is the council's intention is to use more gender neutral designations and titles, which ensure that all residents, employees, and officers of the city feel they are included in the city's vision, regardless of gender-related identity. There is no known opposition to this that has been identified. Are there any questions?
I don't see any questions. This one looks pretty straightforward.
So we can move on to Lafayette 2E, which is for the removal and replacement of archaic charter language. This is also referred by the city council, and they want to replace words like citizen, where U.S. citizenship is not necessarily required, with resident, and replace the term master plan, which is no longer used with comprehensive plan. The city council is recommending this because they think it is the city's strategic priority to be a safe, welcoming, and inclusive community. No opposition has been identified for this one either. Are there any questions?
No questions.
And the final one is also referred by the city councilors. It is to bring the Lafayette charter in line with the state requirements, and so that it is to clean up and clarify the residency requirement for holding office, which shall be at least a year immediately preceding the date of the election. This is to bring the city in line with the state requirements, and no opposition has been identified for this either. Are there any questions for this one, for 2F?
I don't see any questions. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I think we're wrapping up earlier. And I just want to encourage everyone, first of all, thank you for joining us today or watching online. And thank you again to the presenters today. I want to remind everyone to check out the League's online voter guide, vote411.org, for all the election information you need. You'll be able to find details of all the ballots, pro and con statements, and then you'll also be able to compare your candidates side by side for Lafayette City Council, Louisville specifically, and all the elections this year. So please visit vote411.org. And then a reminder that the ballot issue pamphlets are available on our website, lwvbc.org. Everything you need is under the 2021 election tab. And finally, thank you to our election season sponsors. Their generous donations help us put on events like this. So thank you all for joining us today, and we appreciate your time.